program is brought to you in association with First National Bank of Botswana. Botswana's headline inflation saw a record low of 1.5% as of July 2023. This after starting the year with the rate at more than 10%, with significant increases in food parcels and fuel. In an attempt to contain and stabilize the escalating rate of inflation, the Bank of Botswana introduced a new monetary policy rate, which was met with some backlash from consumers. Since then, there has been a drop in fuel prices and, of course, some food parcels. Right on the heels of this development, we get the announcement that the rate of inflation has now dropped to 1.5% in July from 4.6% in June. Contrary to expectations, at a meeting held on August 24, 2023, the Monetary Policy Committee at the Bank of Botswana maintained the monetary policy rate at 2.65%. Furthermore, headline inflation is forecast at 1.2% for August 2023, and the MPC projects that inflation will remain below the lower bound of the objective range temporarily and revert to within the objective range of 3.6% from the first quarter of 2024 into the medium term. What does all this mean, especially for the consumer? We engaged an economist from one of the local financial services institutions, Gomolemo Basele, to investigate. Gomolemo, thank you so much for coming on First Issues and affording us your time. We're talking today about Botswana's headline inflation being a record low of 1.5%. Tell us exactly what happened for that to be that low and why is it making such headlines?
Thanks. Well, firstly, thanks for having me. So yeah, inflation came down quite significantly to that 1.5% as of July, and it came off from 4.6% a month prior. So the major reason that we saw for this happening was primarily based around favorable base effects. So over the last couple of years, we've seen utilities hiking their prices. So the likes of BPC, water utilities, as well as BHC increasing their tariffs. And what we've seen over the course of this year is that most of those tariff increases have been suspended. So it created a situation where essentially inflation came off a very high base last year to the record lows that we've seen this year. Additionally, we saw fuel prices being cut, which also added to the rate of disinflation that we've seen play out as of July.
When the rate of inflation was at a record high, we saw hiking in interest rates. Are we likely to see the same happening now that the rate has gone down in terms of now the rate of lending going down?
So yeah, we saw the central bank, as well as many other central banks around the globe, hiking policy rates to try and contain inflation. As you rightly mentioned, you'd expect the opposite to happen now. But I think the current view is that inflation will only temporarily be below the central bank's lower 3% objective. Our expectation is for it to come back within range at the start of next year and average within at least the central bank's objective range through to 2026. So I think the view currently is that the central bank is most likely not to react by cutting policy rates because there's just a temporary drop that we've seen, and inflation should steadily come back to within range.
Let us talk about the possible downsides of having the inflation rate this low. Are we going to be seeing any negative effects, especially on the economy?
So I think having it this low is definitely a positive. I think the negative effects currently are quite limited, at least through to next year. And in terms of the positives, we've seen salaries being increased from a government standpoint as well as other corporates. So having inflation this low at least frees up the capacity from a household perspective in terms of the level of their real income. So I think it's mainly positive now. We're starting to see those pressures that we experienced over the last 2 or so years starting to recede. And yeah, definitely from a household perspective, it's definitely more positive having inflation at this rate.
So if, like you were saying, that it stays this low for the next year, what possible ramifications could that bring?
Yeah, so I think in our view is that it will stay below 3% for the rest of the year and tick back to within range within the first couple of months of next year. So with that being the view, from our side, we don't expect there to be an immediate policy response because it will be within range. But if it were to remain below, the central bank would maybe have to respond by using one of their monetary policy tools.
Yeah, let us talk more around these monetary policy tools that you've just mentioned.
Yeah, I think the most immediate one that stands out is definitely the monetary policy rate. So that's the tool that's traditionally used by central banks in terms of monetary policy to try and contain inflation and to try and drive sort of the desired kind of economic activity within a specific region.
Let us now just wrap up our conversation by truly understanding what a rate of inflation is. Because if you go on various social media platforms where the regular person is interacting, or the regular people are interacting with one another, the general consensus is that if you're seeing inflation going from 10% to 1.5% as it is right now, the general consensus is that there's generally a problem, and we're supposed to be feeling some sort of effects, sometimes positive, sometimes negative. You could now explain what the rate of inflation is in its most basic terms.
So the rate of inflation basically gives us the rate of price growth for a basket of goods. And this basket of goods essentially depicts or shows average household spending within Botswana. The way it's constructed, the different weights for the different sub-baskets show what an average household or an average consumer in Botswana traditionally spends their money on. So that's what our CPI or our headline inflation actually tries to show us. And the way it's done is that inflation across those various sub-baskets is surveyed between the 15th of one month to the 15th of the next month. So essentially, the inflation figure that we see shows us price growth for the previous month, for a previous period. Where its importance comes in is obviously in terms of forecasting. So you can start to pick up trends in terms of price growth across various goods and services, and then try and factor that in to see where price growth is likely to go going forward.